So this is arbitrary, the number of tablets we've got. The point is that you could start in the middle, I suppose, and then work around it, or you could start and work in a more holistic manner. It doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be a linear manner. The point about these is that you can then take them off and replace them, and then you can reconfigure the meaning, if you like, because you'd have this one surrounded by this meaning, but if you moved it over here, you'd have it surrounded by other meanings. Insofar as we have to look at how we would write a paper, what would be the content of a paper, using Emma for business management. So we're actually going to do that now. We're actually going to paint that, conceive that. So the Emma would be at the centre, and then with what you just said, you've got reflection. And as you were talking, I'm thinking creativity, criticality, reflection and action, problem solving, organisational change. I've got two problem solvers. Organisational change, and then the Emma really is kind of, it's like that will just be the centre of it. You then you'd have the individual versus the group. So this would go back to your research. Would you extend the group out? I mean, you could say, for example, group to society, for example. Would you go out as far as that, or is that too far, too big a jump?
Well, a group is a kind of micro society, isn't it?
Yeah, but I'm just thinking, say, for example, you did, if Queen's, right, so within the Queen's as an organisation, as an institution, if you did, for example, you did it with students who then form part of a group, and then you did it with Queen's management, who then did it with Queen's, I don't know, Institute for Collaborative Research and Humanities, whatever, and then that was then presented to, you could then take it to the next level, which would be then Belfast, I guess. So in the paper, we were talking about using the Emma for a number of these things. I think creativity didn't probably come up high enough, because I know it's probably a word that managers don't really want to hear, because they don't really understand what it is. They think it's about, you know, making models, when actually it's about creative process.
Yeah.
So it's actually
what's coming up with new ways of seeing.
Yeah, new ways of seeing and thinking, right? And then those new ways of seeing and thinking help you to reinterpret the world and present the world differently, present your ideas differently.
Yeah, although innovation is very much based on creativity. So
would you put creativity and innovation together? Because maybe innovation is the application of creativity.
In a management sense, you would.
Would you?
Yes, you would say that innovation stems from new thinking and creativity.
What was the point of the scrapbooks? Did you think? What were they trying to do?
Is getting students to really engage with what they're doing. So engagement with what they're learning. Really just thinking for yourself rather than just downloading whatever you're learning and memorizing it and then repeating it back like a parrot. But it's really about getting them to collect little bits of information that they find interesting and they speak to them through the sketchbooks, and then really thinking about how does this add to your learning process.
I think there is something about the physicality. I've got some books in my room which talk about how we've lost touch with our humanity in a way because we don't do physical things. Mm-hmm. And actually the thing which was my argument, what's the difference between this and this, mm-hmm. is because this is familiar and it doesn't jerk us, it doesn't disrupt anything. Sketchbooks are probably a massive step for a lot of students because they've never drawn since they were at elementary school. It's still a little bit too familiar for me, whereas this is like, it's like this, mm-hmm. and the sound and just everything about them, the touch of them and everything, it's just, they're so different. I think that this kind of disarms people, and I think there's something about...
Yeah, the tactile.
Tactile, yeah.
Well, that's what, again, it reminds me of the conversation about the sketchbooks. It is tactile because you need to paint, paste elements on them, use different materials. So that there was that discussion about the benefit of it being tactile rather than online. There was
just when you were thinking, again, this is great you're speaking because it just kind of these thoughts keep coming up. One thing that I found interesting, the difference between this and the sketchbooks, is that the sketchbooks, again, it presents not exactly linear narrative, but it presents a slightly linear narrative in terms of given a sketchbook, we're slightly familiar with the shape, the form of it. We tend to read in the West from front to back. Mm-hmm. And although you can jump in and out, I found people don't jump in and out. And I've got a sign-in book, I think I told you, which is that there's lots of these Emma stickers stuck in the sign-in book. And I say, yeah, you can jump around, you can just open it wherever you like and just write down your thoughts. They never do that. Mm-hmm. They literally always start front to back. So one thing that I find interesting about these is the fact that you can, you could swap these around, and that introduces this kind of randomness and also this kind of dynamism, which I think is missing from other processes, and I think that's what this really has to offer.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I guess that's getting you out of your comfort zone as well.
I think the starting point, I guess, for me about, and maybe that didn't come through, and this is really that, this was the kind of the pedagogical conversation we had before, which is that really, creativity has two elements to it. But for me, it's really about that I believe, as an educator, you can't foster creative learners if you don't use creative means. Google, for example, wanted like the forward thinkers. Yeah, they've got a different office, they've got a pool table, and they've got all those, you know, they can work as you like, and they are fostering creative means in a different environment, but it's still a little bit conventional. Everyone knows what a pool table is, and everyone, you know, knows what a game machine is. But my strong belief in this as a process is that it's still, you need something which is disruptive and something which is radically different.
So what's the first one?
The first one is disruptive structure, or disruptive. This is kind of the darkness, and we just kind of disrupt this by kind of coming in. So this would represent structure, and this would represent this kind of disruptive nature of something, which is not exactly the counter to it. It's not like two exact clear halves. It's they kind of mash and merge into each other.
What Emma are you working on now?
Emma. The actual Emma. Kind of
Say that again.
the three different Emma you've got in the kind of transparency. It's like it's a rotating. It's never fixed or finite. So it just kind of represents the kind of multiplicity. I'm sure psychologists would have fun analysing my pictures.
Which one's that one?
This one's overwrite. Speak back to.
It's becoming very dynamic, this painting.
Try to leave it there to it dry. This one's limitations.
So when you have an idea or a word that is obviously seems to stand for an idea, you first try and capture it by painting or expressing what that means to you, and then that is the end point of you making the Emma. But no, it's not the end point. That's the end point of you individually creating the Emma.
Right.
But then as soon as you start then sharing it in a discourse, in a sort of dialogue with others, it's the beginning point of a new discussion. It's a new dynamic that opens up, which is the individual Emma becomes the beginning.
And then I think there's another layer to that as well, is that when you put them on the wall, or you put them in some place that's displayed, so you get that kind of, maybe people inside a group would have something to say about it, but they're essentially slightly connected because they're still part of a similar process. They're involved in the event, but then there's like third person, that bystander, which I find interesting, is that we then put them on the wall as something other, which would then start a whole new cycle, and actually then starts conversations with people. Wow, look at that.
I'm trying to find some explanation for why is it so scary to do something that you're not familiar with, or something that you don't know what the outcome of it will be, or everyone wants to know, why am I doing this? How should I do it well? What am I going to get out of it?
But you care though. I mean, I don't get the impression that you would care as a person. I wouldn't care. Up to it, and when you hung it, it's upside down. So it's a way of, when you problem solve something, if you actually look at it from a different perspective, it becomes something else.
Right.
So this probably is the only one that actually has any kind of concrete meaning.
It's not true, because in Emma you have a balance, but you dissociate them at first, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you say the visual is more important than explanation, the meaning making after the visual is less important. Is that what your feeling is?
Yep.
About aren't we kind of saying that the reflection and expression process of the making of Emma is more important or somehow more essential than the dialogue that it starts?
No, I'd be the opposite.
Okay.
I'd actually say the opposite. In fact, honestly, I think a lot of times you might end up with some self-reflection from the process that might be, you know, for you might be profound, but I think actually once you voice that, once you get there, you know, it's like hearing that sound go out the mouth and back in the ear. I think once you get that come back in, I think actually that's where the richness is. So it's actually, for me, a lot of the richness is in other people's interpretation, and not just that, but in giving kind of voice to those kind of ideas. So after we finished all these, what we've ended up with is the 16 Emma, put them on the frame, and on the backs of them we've written a little bit of an explanation. So as you can see, from when we put them down, we painted them and then we put them on the frame, we've actually shifted another dimension. So you'd have that notion of the self engaged in the single Emma on the table, and then perhaps in discourse with other people sat around. But once you remove the Emma from the kind of this like personal ownership, and you put them in this kind of environment, they become quite different. And so then you start to see, as I mentioned, you start to get tensions between different things. Like this blob here, and this, it works quite nicely, but whereas the other one I had didn't work very nicely. So you start to get these kind of tensions, which creates a different jigsaw, a different puzzle, a different kind of permutations of, it's like a reconfiguring the code, if you know what I mean, like you're talking about Lego or something. It's like taking something and actually using the same building blocks to create something else. So what you then end up with, and this is really one of the factors of this process, you end up with something physical. It's a puzzle that is changing, you know. And what we talked about earlier, it doesn't have, in that change and in that shift and in that kind of flux, even a state of uncertainty, which is really what it is. Often uncertainty can create tension in people, or can create a certain, I think, a negative reaction in people, because people get, you know, they get scared of uncertainty. But actually, I think that this uncertainty is kind of in embracing the uncertainty. It's a different kind of uncertainty.
You may want to ask people to put them in a way and then talk around them in a certain way, or only concentrate on a part of it or another part of it.
Yeah. Or again, if this really was a solution towards some business outcome, you could again look at the similarities. I mean, if this was a team and we'd done this, you know, you could literally say, okay, well, let's go for colour preferences. So we've got some soft kind of pastel people. Okay, so we make one team the drip people. So we've got, yep, we could maybe have something because there's some, and then you've got all of these which are kind of like very saturated colours. And then you've got this one which probably goes into, well, it could join any of the groups.
That's obviously the leader.
You've then immediately got 5, you know, we talked before about the Myers-Briggs test, and I know we have different ideas about that, but it is a version of that though, right? It is looking at creative people, that if you wanted to get people to work on projects, you could do that, for example, because these people are reasonably like-minded, or you could do the exact opposite. You could pair those two together.
Because you know they have something to add to each other.
Yeah, exactly. You could just go through and you could choose the ones that absolutely did not go together. I mean, this would be insane if you would put people like that. It would be great. You'd have these totally different, radically different dynamics. Yeah. But in that, you might end up with some richness, and that's the whole point about the push, certainly in education, towards collaboration. That it's taking, you know, people who are in different institutes who don't usually get to speak to each other. You and I, for example, right, where you actually get people to work with, you know, each other from different institutes or different schools, and what you get then is something totally different.
But what I really like is that you take, if they are sub-themes, if each one of these Emmas is a thought on a theme, and everyone has their own thoughts on the theme, then you're really just making conversation a physical thing.
Right, right.
That's what I really like
Yeah.
about it, because it's actually a metaphor
Right.
for this is my piece of the conversation.
Yes, excellent.
You can choose to focus on whatever you want to focus on,
Right.
and instead of getting lost in because what usually happens is we talk about things and we get lost in all kinds of threads, and then we really can't focus on anything anymore because we're just moving around all the time.
Right.
Which is one of the things conversations suffer from, is a lack of focus.
Right.
But then too much focus is too much restraint, and people don't like agendas for that very reason. Whereas this one is a sort of like alternative to both of those, I guess.
And I think the thing is as well, it allows for both of those. It allows, for example, for people to, you know, to look at it as a group, and then you could get feedback on that. Or you could do it in smaller groups, or you could do it in complementary themes, or you could do it in themes that clash. So it's the same thing, but it's like stripping those layers away and allowing the same thing to be reappropriated and reappropriated. It's like having, eggs and butter and milk. You can make a ton of things with eggs and butter and milk, but it's not, it's always edible.
Well, not always.